Good morning and welcome to CSIS and this program of the Renewing American Innovation Program. So as I'm sure you're all aware of CSIS as one of the nation's leading national security think tanks. And about 5 years ago, CSIS's leadership understood that the innovation system in the United States is itself a national security asset, one that needs to be thought of as one, and that needs to be studied and promoted. And if you think about our innovation systems, standards are basically the foundation of this innovation system. And this is a point that Walt Kopan, former NIST director and a founder of our program, understood well. And so the issue of standards and IP is very much at the foundation of our Renewing American Innovation Program. So given that background, we're super excited to have ANSI here today to highlight the release of the draft of the U.S. Standards Strategy, our nation's blueprint for standards leadership and international engagement. I think first published in 2000 and updated every 5 years, I believe, the strategy guides how America's private sector-led, consensus-based standard system advances innovation, competitiveness, and national security in an increasingly complex global landscape. It is now my pleasure to introduce and welcome Dr. Laurie Locascio. Dr. Locascio is President and CEO of ANSI. She previously served as Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology, succeeding Dr. Kopan as well. And in this capacity, she oversaw NIST in his mission to promote U.S. innovation, competitiveness through measurement, science, standards, and technology. This, I think, included NIST's implementation of the U.S. government National Standards Strategy and the implementation of the CHIPS for America program at the Department of Commerce. Prior to her appointment as NIST director, Dr. Locascio was Vice President for Research at the University of Maryland, College Park, and the University of Maryland, Baltimore. She also is has her chops as a professor of bioengineering, among other accomplishments. So really thrilled to welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here in the room, and thank you all for joining us, and of course, everyone online. I know there's a big contingent online as well. So first, all of your words were perfect about what we're about and what we're talking about and why it's so important. But a big thank you to CSIS and the Renewing American Innovation Program for convening this crucial discussion. Your work strengthening America's innovation ecosystem provides a critical context for today's discussion around the United States Standards Strategy. So for more than 100 years, ANSI has been here coordinating the U.S. standard system and enhancing global competitiveness of American businesses and of course, improving quality of life, and that's what we're about. And today we're discussing the United States Standards Strategy 2025. It is, as was said, our nation's blueprint for standards leadership at an inflection point that will determine America's competitive position for decades to come. And so I'm going to start with a fundamental truth. Standards are the invisible infrastructure that powers our modern world. As an example of this, hybrid meetings run on standardized internet protocols, your smartphones connect through standardized 5G networks, and every component in every single electronic system that you see around you depends on standards for precision and scale. So standards aren't just technical documents gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. Dr. Akonjo Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization, said it best in a powerful statement at a recent annual meeting of ISO, the International Organization for Standardization in Rwanda. She said, "Standards are the rules of the market. If you meet the standard, you meet the market." And she also said that trust in the safety and quality and interoperability of products is vital for trade to flow predictably. And that statement really underscores why standards are, in fact, strategic assets that determine market access, shape innovation pathways, and influence global commerce. In fact, those who shape standards shape the future. And increasingly, nations worldwide understand this power. So since the last strategy update in 2020, the landscape has shifted dramatically. Technology acceleration has outpaced traditional development cycles, supply chain disruptions have exposed critical vulnerabilities, and the pandemic, which now seems like a long time ago, demonstrated quickly how global challenges can emerge and then how they can cascade. And most significantly, however, governments worldwide now view standards, particularly for critical and emerging technologies, as compete tools, using them to create technical barriers that favor domestic industries while disadvantaging others. So the January 2026 launch of the updated strategy honestly couldn't be more timely. So the U.S. standards strategy was first published, as was mentioned, in 2000 and updated every 5 years. It really represents this exceptional, extraordinary collaboration among all stakeholders, among industry, government, academia, standards developing organizations, and consumer groups. And the latest revision began with strategic discussions at the ANSI board level, but from there we gathered input from our stakeholders through the policy advisory groups and through our Technology Consortium Council. We then released drafts for public comment, first to our members, but then broadly. And we've held fora to discuss the draft with specific stakeholders groups directly. And so I say all this because it's really a very important process, because the process itself reflects our commitment to stakeholder engagement that makes the United States system both robust and legitimate. And so now I'll go into some details of what the updated standards strategy looks like. It focuses on 4 objectives. Number 1, strengthen international leadership by promoting strategic collaboration and defending fair practices. Technical excellence, not geopolitics, must drive international standards development. Number 2, demonstrate standards value by expanding education about how standards drive innovation, safety, and market access. Too many businesses that I hear from every day don't recognize the competitive impact of standards until it's too late. Number 3, increase efficiencies in standards development by embracing innovative tools and processes, because our processes must evolve as rapidly as the technologies they support in order for us to be relevant. And train that next generation of standards leaders. And number 4, address opportunities and challenges head on by seizing opportunities to maintain active participation in breakthrough technologies while advocating for sustained investment across our entire ecosystem. So at ANSI's Innovation Summit next Tuesday, October 21st in Rockville, Maryland, we're going to come together to talk about operationalizing these strategic priorities. And we'll be identifying concrete steps to adapt our processes to technology's unprecedented pace of change. So what makes America's approach to standards unique and uniquely powerful is that our system is voluntary, it is led by the private sector, and it is market-driven. Now, many nations around the globe rely on top-down, government-controlled standards processes that can be very politically motivated and stifle innovation as a result. And the U.S., however, recognized over a century ago that private sector leadership enables innovation to thrive. And it's not just a philosophical preference, it's actually a strategic reality. Our private sector model delivers real results. And here's how. First, through speed and agility. We promote standards that both fuel and evolve with innovation. Second, through technical excellence, direct participation by technical experts enables businesses to innovate and commercialize rapidly. Third, through market relevance. Standards reflect real-world needs because those building the technologies are at the table. And finally, through global influence, our consensus-based approach has shaped international standards for decades. And this approach, holistically, has positioned America at the forefront of transformative technologies that shape our lives. And yet, precisely when standards have become strategic priorities for other nations, many U.S. companies are pulling back, reevaluating standards investments as costs rather than strategic necessities, and struggling to justify expert participation during challenging economic times. And meanwhile, other countries are aggressively surging participation in international standards bodies, explicitly linking standards to industrial policy, and using technical requirements to advantage their domestic industries. So let me be very specific about what's at stake. In artificial intelligence, standards being written today will determine which approaches to AI safety, governance, and interoperability become that global baseline. Without robust U.S. participation, these standards may not foster the innovation that has made American AI systems world-leading. In quantum computing, standards for quantum-safe cryptography and network protocols will have profound implications for national security and economic competitiveness for decades to come. In advanced manufacturing, standards for smart factories, digital twins, and human AI collaboration will define that next industrial revolution, determining whether American manufacturers lead or whether they follow. In cybersecurity, standards shape how we protect critical infrastructure, secure our supply chains, and defend against evolving threats. And in biotechnology, standards for everything from synthetic biology to precision medicine will shape the future of human health and also agricultural productivity. Organizations engaged in standards development don't just influence their technology's future. They create pathways for their innovations to scale globally on their terms, not on terms that are dictated to them by others. And so this brings me to something that demands greater attention. Standards are national security infrastructure. For our defense capabilities, standards determine whether allied systems can operate together when it matters most. Compatible standards create collective strength. Incompatible standards create dangerous vulnerabilities. For critical infrastructure, standards protect our energy grids from cyber attacks. They safeguard our communications networks, and they ensure that our financial systems can withstand disruption. For supply chain security, standards enable us to verify components, validate trusted sources, and ensure the integrity of products our economy and our security rely on. And for technology sovereignty, the standards that we set today, as I mentioned, in AI and quantum and 6G networks will shape innovation trajectories for generations. Now, our national security agencies, they understand these stakes, and they're actively engaged. But their effectiveness multiplies through partnership with industry's technical expertise and market insights. And this incredible public-private partnership, each sector bringing unique strengths, is exactly what the United States standards strategy seeks to strengthen. So the window for action is now. Critical decisions in the next 24 months will shape these fields for decades. Industry must elevate standards to the boardroom level strategic conversations and investments, committing senior technical staff, participating early when standards are being shaped, and coordinating to advance shared American interests internationally. Government can strengthen our private sector-led system through smart policy, leveraging voluntary standards and regulation, funding standards-relevant R&D, and defending our approach in international negotiations. Academia must integrate standards education into engineering and business curricula. It's happening all over the world in other countries who see standards as strategic investments for global competitiveness. The next generation needs to understand that standards aren't just the last generation's bureaucracy, right? They're a bridge, actually, between innovation and impact. So when we work together, presenting unified positions that reflect our shared commitment to innovation and market-driven development, we amplify our influence exponentially. Now, we are also pioneering new engagement models, moving beyond sending individual experts to international meetings. We're building coordinated strategies, shared resources, and collective action. So let me be direct. We stand at a crossroads. We can strengthen America's standards leadership for the next generation, continuing to shape the technical foundations of global commerce and innovation. We can ensure American innovation scale globally on terms reflecting our values of market competition, intellectual property protection, and technical excellence. We can reinforce an open, rules-based international system that rewards innovation and maintain American leadership. Or we can cede this ground to others, watching as different models, often politically driven and technically inferior, shape the technologies that define the 21st century. The U.S. Standards Strategy 2025 provides our roadmap. Its success depends on every organization recognizing that standards aren't overhead, they're the backbone of competitiveness. The standards we shape today determine how American innovation transforms into global impact tomorrow. The United States Standards Strategy gives us our blueprint, and your engagement here and around the United States will determine whether we build upon it successfully. Together, we can ensure that America continues to lead in the standards that power global innovation and prosperity. Now, before our panel begins, I want to remind you again about Tuesday's session in Rockville, where you can help guide our strategy's implementation for 2026 and beyond. You can register at ansi.org/summit, and I hope to see you there. But today, I'm really looking forward to an amazing panel, to listening to my colleagues, and to working with each of you to advance America's standards leadership for the next generation. Thanks so much for listening. Invite up our panelists.
I'm going to sit in the middle, and you're going to sit here. You're going to have each of them respond to your remarks, and then you speak for about 5 to 10 minutes, okay? I'm going to have Patrick go first. Then you first. Yeah, we'll sit wherever you want. But then you speak, and then Jason, and then Laurie. Okay?
So Patrick, I think
sit wherever you want. Okay. Are we ready? Are we live? Okay, good. Okay. Well, first, thanks to everybody for coming, and to the, what I'm told are as many as 150 people are registered online. But first, a thanks to Dr. Locascio and Dr. Shivakumar for your opening remarks, and thanks to ANSI and CSIS for convening this timely and important discussion on a U.S. standard strategy for the 21st century. I'm honored to be the moderator. My name is Philip Singerman. For a decade, I served with Dr. Locascio and my colleague Mary Saunders, who is the Senior Vice President for Government Relations and Public Policy. Did I get that right, Mary? At ANSI. I'm fond of saying that Mary taught me everything I know about standards, but unfortunately she didn't teach me everything she knows about standards. So I'm looking forward to this panel. We have a very sophisticated audience with nearly 50 people in attendance here, representing industry, academia, and international organizations. Accordingly, we have assembled a panel of nationally, indeed internationally recognized experts to lead the discussion. This program will run until 11:30. We'll have comments and discussion by the panelists till about 11:15, and then an opportunity for Q&A from the audience. But first, no discussion of standards would be complete without the obligatory reference to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which grants to Congress the power, quote, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Every NIST employee has to memorize this constitutional section. Standards matter, of course, as Dr. Locascio outlined, not just to facilitate economic efficiency and encourage innovation, but are a matter of life and death. In the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904, more than 1,500 buildings were completely leveled and some 1,000 severely damaged, bringing property loss from the disaster to an estimated $100 million. Fortunately, there were very few fatalities. 1,200 firefighters helped bring the blaze under control, both professional and volunteers from Baltimore City and from the surrounding counties and outlying towns of Maryland, as well as from out-of-state units that arrived on major railroads from Washington. However, when they arrived, they found that their hoses were not compatible with Baltimore's hydrants, and they had to watch helplessly as the fire destroyed the downtown. One of the very first assignments of the National Bureau of Standards, which had been created 3 years earlier, was to address the diversity in systems. Nearly 100 years later, the 9/11 terrorist attacks highlighted a comparable catastrophic failure in first responder communications due to a lack of interoperability. Different agencies used incompatible radio systems, frequencies, and devices, preventing them from communicating with each other, even within the same response area. This breakdown led to a lack of real-time information sharing, such as the inability of firefighters in the North Tower to receive orders about the South Tower's collapse, resulting in higher casualties. 2,753 individuals perished, including 412 first responders. The subsequent 9/11 Commission report made fixing this issue a national priority. In both instances, the government, in this case, the National Bureau of Standards and then NIST, were responsible for participating in the technical analysis and recommendations for resolving this situation in the future. So government at all levels plays an important role supporting the development of industrial strategies. But as Dr. Locascio pointed out, what is distinctive about the U.S. approach is that it is voluntary, transparent, market-driven, and private sector-led, with a significant role played by standards development organizations such as ANSI, ATIS, NEMA, and corporations such as Microsoft. So to get started, we'll first ask each panelist to introduce themselves, describe their role and experience in the standards development process, and comment on Dr. Locaccio's opening statement. How should U.S. strategy on standards respond to emerging challenges, such as potential bad actors, geopolitical fragmentation, and regulatory divergence? After these initial statements of 5 to 10 minutes, we will turn to the challenge of accelerating standards development for fast-moving technologies like AI, without sacrificing the traditional proven U.S. model. Next, we will turn to the public policy framework. What does public-private collaboration look like when developing standards with both commercial and national security implications? And how can we effectively engage the broader public? And finally, we'll ask the panelists to comment on the proposed U.S. strategy. How is your organization going to leverage the strategy in your own strategies? And what commitments will you make? This will bring us till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So sit back, buckle up, make yourselves comfortable. So let's get started. We're going to start with Patrick first, then Susan, then Jason, and then Laurie in comments. Patrick.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to ANSI and CSIS for convening this very important conversation around standards, which are often overlooked, as we heard. And they do underline all of modern society and our economy and are quite important for our global leadership. So I am Senior Vice President of Strategy and Technical and Industry Affairs at the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, NEMA. We represent 350 electrical manufacturers who make everything from power generation through the transmission and distribution system and into electrical systems in your homes, buildings, industrial facilities, and increasingly in the transportation space with connected traffic infrastructure, electric vehicles, and other modes of electric transportation. We are seeing a really unique moment for the electrical industry and the energy industry more broadly. The growth of data centers and AI is creating electricity demand like we haven't seen before. NEMA released a study earlier this year that projects a 50% electricity demand growth by 2050. To put that in perspective, growth has been relatively flat for decades. And so we're at a moment where we need to be investing very rapidly in electricity infrastructure. More generation, more transmission, more distribution, more energy storage, more energy efficiency, and flexible loads, demand response, where you can shut things down during periods of high demand to keep the grid reliable. And this is important for a number of reasons. It's our economic leadership. We want to win the AI race. There's a national security angle. We need to provide reliable electricity to agencies here in the DC area and our military bases and elsewhere. And standards facilitate this. And it's a good moment to re-release the updated standard strategy because the way we write those standards has to keep up with the pace of technology innovation. And at a moment for our industry, the electrical industry, we have to innovate very rapidly. Otherwise, not succeeding is not an option. There would be power outages that are unacceptable. And so to meet that moment, electrical manufacturers are very rapidly coming out with new digital, AI-inclusive technologies that can make sure that we're delivering power where it needs to be when we need it. NEMA has had to update its processes and procedures to meet that speed. And I'll get into this a little bit more over the course of the panel, but 5 years ago when we released the last version of the standard strategy, it took NEMA anywhere between 1.5 years and 2.5 years to publish a standard, and that's not atypical. But it's unacceptable for today's technology and innovation. And when we need a standard, we need it now, and we need to get it out and used by data center developers and others quickly. So we updated our process, and we're now able to write and publish a standard. Since we updated this process, our average has been 5 months. It's an interim step. It's not the ANSI process that we are accredited by ANSI to do, but it's a way to get that technical guidance out quickly as you're going through the ANSI process. So I'm very pleased to be here. Happy to get into a lot more of what NEMA's doing and the technology trends we're seeing and why standards are so important. But I will turn it over to Susan.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. I think I'm going to say some similar things, but from a different industry perspective. So first of all, I'm Susan Miller, President and CEO of ADIS. We are an ANSI-accredited SDO, but we also do and have a portfolio of a whole lot of other things. We do requirements. We do proof of concepts. We do open source. It's a wide-ranged portfolio, but at the heart of it is our activities in standardization. We also, our work includes a wide array of initiatives. Many of them are critical and emerging technologies. At the top of the list is 6G. We're working on network-enabled AI. We're working on quantum computing. We're working on zero trust. And we're working on robocalling. So we have, again, a broad spectrum of activities where 165 companies are engaged and over 1,500 subject matter experts. Probably what we're most widely known for is that we are the founding partner of the third generation partnership project, 3GPP. And it is through 3GPP that North America, as an operating partner, ATIS being that operating partner, actually contributes to global standardization for wireless technologies. So I think it's, responsible, we are responsible for the mobile generations that you've enjoyed on your phone, now being 6G. To Phil's question, I want to come back a little bit to Laurie's speech because, first of all, I thought it was far-reaching and touched on all of the key points. And I was really struck by your characterization of standards as a compete tool, because I think that's really at the heart of what drives many of our members right now. The thing I might challenge, and it was a reference that you made, is that the top-down model stifles innovation. And while I think we philosophically agree that's the case, I think there's a lot of demonstrated examples where that may not be the case. And clearly, we are seeing that in wireless mobile technology. Reference to the activities in 3GPP as it relates to the power that is growing with respect and coming from the PRC. So I think ANSI, this is the most robust standard strategy that you've had. I think the interpretation of it that you gave us with those pillars are extremely important, and I'm looking forward to promoting that standard strategy into our sector.
Thank you. Jason?
Hey, good morning. I'm Jason Matiso. I'm the General Manager of the Corporate Standards Group at Microsoft. And I think on this panel I represent sort of the industry perspective, but I would like to give a shout out to my many colleagues from across industry who are active participants across the standardization system. For Microsoft, standardization is an interesting topic because it is wonderfully chaotic. And what I mean by that is you have every one of our engineering teams that have different needs, and they are making their own decisions about the standardization work that they do. But my organization, as a centralized function, is trying to not corral anything, not even guide the cats. We're going to let the cats go where they go. But the idea is, can we think about standards as a strategic asset for our entire portfolio? And at the same time, we have recognized that there is a class of standardization that does address broad horizontal societal issues where it touches upon regulation. Artificial intelligence has been mentioned here. Accessibility, cybersecurity, privacy, sustainability. There are big topics where you have every government in the world, every industry in the world considering these factors, and the role that standardization plays to sit between what those new expectations of trustworthy technology behavior are and how we implement requires sustained global engagement to get it right. And so that's where my team spends a great deal of our time. The other thing that I represent on stage here that's important is I am a people manager of technical diplomats. And one of the things that you cannot underestimate in the importance of the conversation around standardization is at the heart of it, we're all going to talk about technology and we can get down to the bits and bytes. It's a people problem. Standardization is about getting diverse groups of people together who have individual self-interest, and they need to come together in a group for a collective outcome. And that's a fascinating dynamic that is at the heart of it. And one of the biggest challenges I think that we face when we think about standardization is as government frames standardization in the context of geopolitical competition, we by definition reduce the ability for the actors to come to the table under a rules-based system and find consensus. And so we have as a topic here, I think, a big thing to chat about. I greatly appreciate Laurie's comments. I think it was a wonderful speech about standardization, which it's hard to talk about standardization in a way that it's really compelling. I thought that was great. I think that there is unequivocal empirical evidence that an industry-led system wins out. And I'm not just saying that because I'm industry and I'm interested in what Microsoft's self-interest is. I think when you look at every example around the world of top-down, government-led standardization, it has had a less effective, less competitive outcome than when you have the diversity of interests to come together and allow for the messiness of a market-led system. If a standardization body doesn't produce standards that are good, that are not useful to the market, they will fail. And people like me who are looking at the standard system are highly concerned at all times that we are going to be precluded from the options of choices of the types of standardization work that we can do. And this is a wonderful dynamic. You have folks who are standards bodies whose job it is to bring together those organizations and create that opportunity for collaboration, and industry who will then, on the other side of that, be skeptical and say, okay, I would like to put my chips on the table over here and over here and over here. So I think that there's a really interesting dynamic that plays out. But in Laurie's speech, the essential part of what the US standardization system has enabled is a market competition-based industry-led system. And if we lose that, if we go to a system where we start to say standardization is a function of geopolitical competition, so therefore government should put its thumb into the system, we will lose the opportunity for the global leadership that we have had. I just wanted to make one last comment. We're sort of reacting to two things that were said. I think it is of critical importance that government has paid more attention to standardization. I don't wish my message to be misunderstood, but government is a stakeholder at the table. And it's essential that that stakeholder voice be part of the process. And I would hope that government can be a champion for the due process and the quality of the standardization governance system that allows everybody, and I mean all parties from all countries, to be able to come to the table and to have that opportunity to have a collaborative outcome. The other thing that we're always faced with is that industry is fickle about standardization. I've now been doing standards at Microsoft for a long time. Not as long, I had hair when I started at Microsoft, but that's a totally different story. But it's been 20 years that I've been doing standards at Microsoft, and what I've observed is a sine wave. It's what I have called the sine wave problem over time. The executives who are involved in a given product or technology stream don't care about standards until they do. And then it becomes the thing that they have to win. And then they throw resources at it like mad and they want to do it. And then they release their product and they stop caring. And they go off to think about other things. And then they come back, and then they go back. And then it's this wave. It's not that standards stop being important, but they stop being important to that individual who has budgetary authority on the travel and use of resources, because it's a people issue. And there are types of standardization work, and I think the need is for that long-term sustained engagement, which is the critical backbone of how standards bodies function. And that's why you end up with organizations such as mine within an organization like Microsoft. But this sine wave is playing against a different problem now. And Laurie and I have chatted about this in the past. It's what I call, also, I keep naming things, the 3-clock problem. Innovation is moving. The first clock is going super fast. We guys are talking about AI. AI models right now are outpacing Moore's law by 3 to 1, right? So the pace at which we were that we were growing the density of transistors, the model capabilities is going even faster than that, and people are moving super fast. There is no standards body in the world that will keep up with writing specs at that pace. Won't happen. If you have due process and you have the transparency of a system and you have the opportunity for people to comment, that won't be the place where standards are going to work out. Standards do play a role as you get to trusted behaviors and you start needing to come to agreement on things like communications protocols, and the idea that you and I might not work in the same organization, but we have to come to an agreement. We need the due process of standardization to get that done. So it's moving slower, but it's an essential part of the process for those people who are moving super fast at the leading edge of the innovation. And then finally, the third clock is the law. And it's moving stately and slowly. We don't want fast law generally in society, right? You want people to be thinking carefully as laws are made. Those three clocks have to be functioning together at all times. And if you're a standards practitioner and you're not looking across all three, then you're missing the boat. And so for us, I think one of the things that Laurie has done so well and her team at ANSI have done so well with this document is they're really starting to grapple with the idea of finding that balance between the need for that stability against the pace of that innovation. And I actually don't think that those things are incongruous, but I do think you have to recognize that they're going to move in different ways. So with that, I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Laurie, you want to comment and respond to what you've heard?
Yes. So first of all, so many great things were just said, and these are some of the smartest people I know in standardization. I just really am loving this. First of all, I'm going to start by saying that you can see the agility in the American system. So the American system has a number of ways that you can jump into standards development, right? And you mentioned a number of different processes and products that you have that aren't standards, but they're kind of the maybe precursors, or there are different options that people can use. You don't see that other places in the world. You don't see that kind of agility where we really kind of have developed this interesting, agile, fit-for-purpose approach to standards. It's so American, to be honest with you, right? Very creatively developed. If you want to develop something really quickly, you might go to one place. If you want to, get consensus really fast, and then if you want to go to some place where it's, you need to even slow it down a little bit because you don't want it to go faster than the technology is developing. You might go to another place. If you want to go someplace where you are actually thinking about pre-regulation, you might go to another place. So we have all of this built into our system, so agile. I honestly think when I look around the world, I think other people are just noticing that hey, wow, they got a lot of ways to get things done at the speed at which they need to get it done. And I think that's been more and more apparent to me, and I just would react that way from all of the different things that you've all said. I'll also say that I believe that our private sector model, because of the way we do it in the United States so differently than most places in the world, can really pivot much faster than a state-directed model. And I think that is very, very helpful to support our industries in the things that they want to achieve and accomplish. I think when it comes to let me first say that I didn't really introduce myself, so I'm going to go back just a minute, and then I want to react to something that Jason said. So I feel like my first job was at NIST, so I feel like I grew up in standards, or at least knowing why standards were important. But the first time it really hit home was when I was asked to chair a committee in ISO on nanotechnology. And all of a sudden I was thrust into this international arena where negotiation was critical. Technical excellence, you had to know what you're talking about, right? Because people don't pay attention to you in the standards system if you don't know what you're talking about. So that's the first thing. But your ability to negotiate and convince people that you've got the right answer is critical. And so I love that you talked about technical diplomacy or technical diplomats. Is that the word you use, Jason? Because it's absolutely true. You have to have a different approach when you go to the table because you are there negotiating on behalf of a technology or a standard that you approach in the standard method that you want to develop. But anyway, why don't I just stop there and we can allow the conversation. Well, there's many other things I wanted to react to, but we can get there.
Do you want to comment on anything you've just heard?
Well, Jason, if you don't mind, I'm going to steal that term because I also love the technical diplomats term.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, and it's absolutely how we have to work internationally to get things done. I talked about the speed at which we need to be standardizing to meet the electricity demand here in the United States, but we can't just focus domestically. We do need to be active in international standards. And we're seeing innovation happening globally. A lot of NEMA members are multinationals. We are looking at new and emerging technologies like direct current, which functions fundamentally different from alternating current and is the same globally. That's not the case with alternating current. I don't want to bore you with the specifics. But these are increasingly international standards, and we are needing to get involved in the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, for us. ISO is another global body. And to do that, it's relationship-based. And the way that international standards work, it tends to be one country, one vote on how you're voting to approve these. And so the United States gets one vote, which means we cannot act alone in international standards. We have to have partnerships. We have to be technical diplomats and bring our allies along and get them engaged. And that's something that NEMA has been doing in our own international standard strategy, is building those partnerships and reaching out to our allies and getting them more involved too. So I love that term. So thank you for introducing that to the conversation.
I wanted to talk a little bit about what Jason said relative to standards being a people issue. And the strain and pressures that are being brought to bear on those resources related to that. And I think what we're seeing, particularly in the development of mobile wireless standards and 3GPP, is the need to approach the process a bit differently. Something that I cannot take credit for, but I think really describes it well: continuous innovation, continuous disruption. And so where you're going to bring the executives and the business community along is dispelling that standards is a long game, all right? And being able to convey and close that gap between the business value and the standardization process. So with continuous innovation and continuous disruption, I mean, basically in our world, a generation of mobile wireless technology takes 10 years. We don't set that schedule. That schedule is actually set by the ITU, an external organization telling us you're going to spend 10 years releasing a generation of technology. So 6G is due in the marketplace 2029, 2030. Here in the US, I think our government would like to see some manifestation of it at the 2028 Olympics. So a lot of pressure is being brought to bear on that. So can we somehow take apart the process, which is what we're starting to look at, and respond to a company's needs for a functionality now versus a 10-year cycle of an entire generation of technology. So this notion is not an easy one to grasp, but I think it's going to be critical when you think about AI. When you think about critical and emerging technologies, we're really going to have to take it apart and be more directly responsive in the standardization community to what the business marketplace needs.
Jason, do you want to comment?
Very quickly, the one thing that I think it's important for us all to keep in mind, I think people are throwing around a lot of acronyms, as is true in any standardization conversation. But the reality that I think most people don't grapple with is the scale of the standardization system. When we talk about what's going on, there are more than 1,000 standards bodies active at any given time. There are tens of thousands of people involved in standardization projects at any given time. And the diversity of that system is to be guarded, but that is probably its very greatest weakness is in describing standardization. We lose the nuance. And so when somebody says standards, and they paint with this incredibly broad brush, we end up with sort of a real challenge. And to Laurie's comment, I think that other countries have studied our standardization system. very closely. And at one level, our colleagues across the Atlantic have looked at the standardization system in the United States as chaos and as a real problem because it has created challenges for their industry to engage. And at the same time, if you look in China and the work that was done around social organization systems, that was a direct result of them realizing that the top-down system was not netting them the results that they were looking for. And they wanted to embrace and try and find a way to understand what had happened in the US to see if they could make that better for their economy. I think people are both envious of, and I don't mean that in a childish way, but there's a desire to see that level of capability that the US system has produced, and they need to try and convert that or understand it for what it means in their economy or their social structures. For the US, I'm reminded by a gentleman, he said it a lot more crassly than I'm going to say it, but if you were a gentleman from Manchester, UK, in a very particular accent, told me at one point, if you're in a race and you're way out in front, do you slow down and look behind and let everybody catch up, or do you run like bleep? I'm just going to leave where he went with that. But the point is, for the US, we should be running. We should be running fast, and not because that is a way to then denigrate anybody else's system, but everybody else is trying to figure out how to keep up with what we're doing. Don't slow down. Don't put in place those things that would then put the brakes on that system. Go fast. Now, the one thing that we haven't really talked about, Laurie raised it in her speech, and I love that she did, because I have been a vocal proponent of this for a long time. We need to understand the relationship between standardization and open source software development. Now, this is true for the IT industry, and I want to be really careful. ANSI represents every industry. And it might be that steam pipe fittings and open source software have nothing to do with each other, and that's fine. But relative to critical and emerging technologies, we must recognize that the reason the fickleness and the worry that industry is leaving standardization is that when it comes to the first clock, remember, going back to my 3 clocks, when I'm going to get 60 engineers together from 25 different companies and get an agreement on technology done, and I can do it in 6 weeks, not 5 months, I'm going to do that, right? So people are turning to open source for that. But it turns out that is not the screwdriver that fits every single tool need in the world. And so there's a failure to then over-index and say that's the only way to come to collaborative agreement. And the entire spectrum has to be made available. And if we're going to run and we're going to win, then I think that fundamentally we need to come to a better understanding of the spectrum, and endorsing the complexity of that spectrum is the way we stay out in front.
Yeah, I think that's right. It is a complex system, and a lot of people who are new to it don't even understand how it works, or how they enter it, or where to enter it. And so I know we're going to talk about how to get the attention at the board level or at CEO level of for standards priorities, but I think it is really around trying to make sure first everybody does understand our agile system and how and where to use it, right? Because not everybody does. Some people only use it defensively, to be honest with you. Some people use it as part of their overall strategy and approach it as a big part of their offensive strategy globally. But knowing how and where you want to use it is really important, and that, even though it's I'll use chaotic is what you said, chaotic, or at least, and I use the word agile. So even though it's a complex system, you have to know how to use it and where it's appropriate to enter into it. But that all comes to having people who are in charge of the money, knowing where and when they want to use standards and standards development. Can I say something really quickly?
Of course, you were the undersecretary. You can say whatever you want.
I meant to give a big shout out to Mary Saunders, who has done an amazing job,
Agreed.
really, in this development of this strategy. So thank you. Thanks for that.
So I also would like to pick up on one of your phrases, I think it was the rules-based system. And I wonder if, so post-World War II, we were the industrial hegemon. And that system, that regime still lasts with certain perturbations. But we're seeing that being upended now. The rules are not clear. And I'm wondering to what extent does our agile, market-driven, industry-led system depend upon stability, predictability, consistency, regularity in our overall global trade system? Do you have any sense of that? Do you think that that's an issue?
I think that standards can help clarify. And I'll give you an example.
Good.
It's been not unique to the Trump administration, but under the Biden administration as well, there's been a focus on domestic manufacturing and building back that industrial base. And as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, this major investment in U.S. infrastructure, there were domestic content rules, Build America, Buy America rules that said you need to have X% of domestic content in your products. Each federal agency had different interpretations of that, and manufacturers were looking at all this complicated rules and guidance and didn't know where to start. It seemed like it was conflicting. So NEMA, representing these manufacturers, we saw this problem and we said, let's develop a process standard that can help companies comply with these rules and regulations. And we did. We published a standard and we launched a program called Make It American to help manufacturers put these processes in place to comply with the federal regulations to give them some clarity and assurance. And we've built on that program since it launched. So there's a baseline standard where you can certify that you have these processes in place in a specific facility. But we're seeing specific components now that are often in the national interest, whether from an economic standpoint or a national security standpoint, like transformers, for example. Every electron you use in your daily life flows through a transformer. And right now there's a long lead time, and many of those transformers are still made abroad. We're trying to build more here. So we published a medium and high voltage equipment specific specification that gives that clarity for domestically produced transformers and compliance with those federal rules and regulations. We did this using our accelerated process that I mentioned earlier because manufacturers needed that guidance now on how to comply with these rules and regulations. And it's been a great success and is still growing. So I do think that standards can help be a solution to that complexity that you noted.
Thank you. Does anyone else is anyone else sensing that there's a challenge from the upending of our traditional global system, and are you tracking that, or do you think it's not a major issue?
Do you want to jump in?
I mean, Phil, I think there is a challenge to our global system. But I do think it's going to be a balancing act to actually provide the rules-based system and have it somehow be translated to be responsive to these critical and emerging technologies that are going to require speed and agility. So I think foundationally, that system benefits when you have clarity, when you have certainty, when you are wedded to some fundamental principles around consensus, around how to engage. But at the same time, I do think looking forward, we're going to need to keep innovating the system in the context of where the globe is going.
And I guess what I would do is I would be very careful to differentiate in your question, when we speak of the law and trade agreements and how the law and trade agreements affect what happens in standardization and what happens when I speak of rules-based, I'm speaking of the governance of a standards body and what is needed for those people who are going into the room. Right. You need to understand exactly how decisions will be made. You want to make sure that the system is open. You want to make sure there's a dispute resolution process. You want to make sure that IP is clear, how it will be handled. You need to make sure that there are documents will be maintained, et cetera, et cetera. So governance of a standards process is what gives that standards process, or it gives people trust to be in the room, and that's a really important part of it. But when I look at the system of laws and trade agreements, that is absolutely now having an effect on standardization. In particular, as we see the fragmentation of moving away from globalism and people's skepticism of the WTO, doesn't matter how you individually feel about it, we now are in a world where that is the discussion. We're seeing a fragmentation and a move away from the global harmonized standards context and moving towards regional bodies and moving towards regionalism. And the problem with that regionalism is what many regions are finding is that the political push to fragment away is a movement away from the experts, which is a very weird outcome for them. So you have entities who are saying, we need to be doing our own standards locally, and then I want to write standards on this topic. And they look around the room and they don't have the people necessary to actually write the standards in a meaningful way, because it's a people problem just as much as it's everything else. And when you're in the international meeting, many, many, many countries, in fact, most countries have benefited from the fact that the experts will come in and the few experts in a given topic become available to everybody through that openness and capability. And so this fragmentation is happening, but the net result for many regions of the world is actually a decrease in capability rather than what they were hoping for, which was an increase for their own local champions. And their own local champions are actually knocking on the door of government and saying, I don't have the people to do this. I need access to that international expertise. So I do think it's having an effect. It's having an effect in a lot of ways, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that any standards body needs to be clear on its governance, because that's why people walk in the door in the first place.
Yeah, and Phil, I would just add that I think what we're seeing is that is the playground for the geopolitics. When it comes to that rules-based approach, that's where we see the politics at play in the strongest ways.
And it's one thing that strategy emphasizes our protection of the rules-based system, right? Good governance, the way that we develop standards has to be trusted, because standards are trusted. If you can't trust the process by which they were developed, you can't trust the standard. And as things are shifting geopolitically and things are changing right now economically, every day, right? Standards really do provide that confidence that you can still do, you can still trade, you can still negotiate, you can still operate, you can still buy your part from someplace else in the world because they conform to a standard that allowed that supply chain to be unbroken. So I think it's, as the swirl is going all around us, standards and good governance, made under good governance, can be that confidence chain that doesn't break.
Thank you. I'm reassured, actually. So what just so everybody knows, what I'm hearing is that in an interesting way, the standard setting system is somewhat insulated from the global trading system, somewhat insulated, and it's insulated because of the agility of the system and its creative disruption, your phrase, creative
Continuous innovation.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you.
But it has to be protected.
Yes, that's correct. It has to be protected. So let's turn to public policy. It's 11:05. We'll take 10 more minutes and then questions from. So if you have questions, you start to think about them. what does public-private collaboration look like when developing standards with both commercial and security implications? And related to that and broader, how can we more effectively engage with the wider public, congressional leadership, executive leadership, and so forth?
Are you starting on this side this time?
Okay.
Yeah, so first of all, when everyone is at the table, it's a win-win. And I think the most important thing when it comes to national security issues is that there's good conversation and awareness brought to the table by the people who understand the national security implications. The communication part is really, really essential so that everyone understands, or the people understand where they're coming from. Earlier in my career, it was post 9/11. It was actually right after the anthrax attacks. I was asked to convene a group to talk about how to do sampling for biothreat agents, because we did that not as well as we could have during the anthrax attacks. And we brought together industry, public sector. We brought together, everybody who was involved in the forensics investigations, everybody who was involved in the public safety analysis, the Defense Department. Everyone had a different viewpoint on how you would handle an important biothreat agent, but they all talked and compromised, and nobody compromised on the thing that was most important for them. But they were willing to give up the things in the standard that didn't really mean that much, but it meant something to somebody else. So I think it's really all about communication coming together and making sure people understand the implications of what goes into a standard.
I'd like to take the government question from a little bit of a different angle. In our industry, a lot of decisions are made by state and local governments. And we see problems when you have a lack of industry guidance, because then you get a proliferation of 50 different solutions. Or worse, if it's county by county or municipality by municipality. So one recent example, with electric vehicles, you have a battery in your garage that could power your home. And it could export power to the grid during peak hours and be a resource to the grid or your home. But there was a lack of guidance on how to actually permit those bidirectional installations. And so local governments that are sending an inspector out to check the electrician's work, they didn't know if it was a safe, effective installation or not. So we saw this problem and we developed a standard, a power export standard, that gave that guidance to the local jurisdictions on how to permit these installations. And now industry stepped up. There's a common approach for the whole country to follow, and you avoid that patchwork. So it's standards as solutions to everyday problems. And we've been spending a lot of time talking about international agreements and the role of the federal government, but some of it's also day-to-day practicality of it and getting down to that very local level.
For any further comments on this subject? No? Okay. So let's turn to our last question regarding the strategy and what your organizations are thinking of doing to advance the strategy, and what commitments you're capable of and prepared to make to move it forward. So let's start with Jason.
So I guess where I'll start is the U.S. standardization strategy that ANSI is promulgating codifies principles that we hold dear, and we are actively investing to uphold them. So, at the end of the day, the rubber meets the road with where we put people and how we do our work and the things that we're involved in. And we continue to invest broadly in standardization, but I will tell you with absolute certainty, it has nothing to do with standards. Right? It has to do with business. It has to do with the fact that we are trying to be successful in the marketplace. Our motivation is very simple. We build technology and we try and sell it. And we're going to do that over and over again. And we recognize that standards are a critical part of that stream. But Laurie's point a moment ago cannot be lost. If we don't trust the system, then the standards are worthless. And not just us as participants, I mean the people who are going to use the technology, they are looking for confidence in many different ways. And so that is key. The second, in terms of the process, we are advocating that ANSI continue to think harder and deeper about what's in that strategy. And I think it's so healthy that it's not only just every 5 years, but it's the depth to which ANSI is going with their incredibly broad stakeholder community to have that conversation, which gives us greater faith in the document. But the document itself is, it's paper. It's yet another example of people saying, oh, it should be this way. Then do we invest? And as I said, yes. The answer is going to be, if that's there, we then follow. And then finally, we remain committed to the international standards engagement process. We believe in the idea of looking for coherence around the world in how standards play a role as different societies wrestle with things that they care a great deal about. Standards help us have a global business, and that is an essential part of it. So we are equally engaged in the entire spectrum of standardization, but at some would consider the most heavy process, the most de jure elements, those things are critical to maintain as well, and ANSI plays an essential role for us in that. So.
Yeah, so I would say ditto to everything Jason said. I would add one more dimension to all of that, and I think it has to do with having our government really appreciate what they can do to advance the system. So I think there really needs to be very concerted advocacy and education, recognizing this industry-led, market-driven approach. We need to be hand in hand with our government. They need to be a key voice that represents the standardization system here into the global community. We want standards to be global. Nothing could be more at the heart of the communications industry than global standards. You all wouldn't be able to travel and use your phone the minute you left the country if that weren't at the heart and soul of what's important. We do think we need investment. We need very targeted funding in R&D. We aren't seeing that. We really need that. We need, and I say this a lot when I go to agency meetings, interagency coordination and collaboration. I meet with one agency one day and another agency the next day, and it's clear they aren't talking to each other. So that interagency collaboration is really, really key. And then finally, something we didn't touch on, we really need the policy reforms that our government is responsible for to match what's happening in standardization. And the issue there are the visas. How we have people work together globally, how we get them into our country. Right now, it's a very, very heavy lift, and it doesn't necessarily produce results. So I would add, I agree with everything Jason said, but I would add this government interface is incredibly important. And we came out of an administration where I thought standardization had a new cachet. I mean, every time we turned around, there was a new undertaking, a new initiative that the government wanted. And I think we're lacking the certainty and the clarity that we need from this current administration.
So we're at NEMA, we're very well aligned with the standards strategy, and I think that it was extremely well done. So kudos to the ANSI team for putting that together and for seeking so much input from the standards community. An industry-led standards model is incredibly important for all the reasons we've been spending an hour talking about. But industry, they are the innovators that can move quickly. They have the experts who can come around the table and do it. And government's a partner and needs to be at the table, and we work quite closely with our federal partners when there's not a shutdown and they're able to come to the meetings. But NEMA has has been pursuing a lot of the tenets in the strategy. And we see it as imperative because we cannot move fast enough. In our industry, as I mentioned at the beginning, electricity demand is increasing. Technology innovation is accelerating. We cannot move at the pace that standards were 5 years ago. And so we are updating our processes and procedures, and I'm encouraged that this is also a focus of ANSI to do the same. We are looking at American leadership and how can standards help build a U.S. manufacturing base and resolve some supply chain constraints that we're seeing, and using standards like our Make It American program to do that. Looking at technology innovation and interoperability and how standards can deploy more advanced modern technologies, how standards are needed to get the power to data centers to do everything. I feel like AI is everywhere, thanks to Microsoft and others. So I just can't emphasize that this is a perfect moment to be launching this standard strategy, and very grateful to ANSI and CSIS for shining a light on it.
Laurie, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, maybe two comments. One is absolutely government is a really critical part of this whole conversation. And having been on both sides, I really do appreciate that very much. As a matter of fact, I think it's one of the most robust partnerships that have existed in the United States between industry and government supporting that private sector-led approach that works so well for us and for our industries to be healthy. And then the last thing I want to say is, the work starts today, right? We've got a lot of work to do moving forward. We'll continue to have the conversations. It will be our agenda to keep pushing this forward, keep convening, keep talking, and really build it out to something that's meaningful that we can work toward together.
You'll all have a lightning round at the end, so you'll have one. But questions? Any questions from the audience? Please introduce yourself. No speeches, no advertisements. Just ask a question.
No speeches, no advertisements. Got it. I'm Aaron Levy. I'm the Vice President of Federal Relations at the International Code Council. So not a sales pitch, but we are sitting in a building that is built to our 2015 International Building Code. A proud member of the SDO community, and thanks to CSIS for organizing this event. All four of you talked about the uniqueness of the American standard development system, the agility of the American standard development system, the consensus-based nature of it. At the heart of that is copyright protection. And the ability, I know I just threw a grenade into the audience, the ability of SDOs in this country to maintain our copyright protection in the midst of an open information environment. As is often said, we have more access to information right here than President Reagan did in his entire White House in terms of technology. So from the perspectives of the panel, without getting into specific legislation, what are your views on a 40,000-foot level of how we as the SDO community try and find that sweet spot, especially for those of us whose codes and standards are incorporated by reference by state and local government, between maintaining our copyright protection and that revenue stream, which often is the driving force of our SDOs, to trying to make sure that information is available both locally, statewide, nationally, and globally in this open information environment. Finally, Laurie, it is good to see you again. I worked for you briefly at the MEP, part of the leadership team there, and congratulations on your success. And also, as someone new to GR, Mary Saunders, I was told to seek her out as the legend of the GR community.
Okay,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
What can I say?
Anybody want to respond?
You want to start?
Yeah, I would like to, because this is important, and I'm glad that you raised it. I mentioned our EV power export. NEMA has a lot of standards that are used by government, and when it's referenced in a regulation or in legislation and it becomes compulsory, there's a need for users to be able to access those standards. That's legitimate. At the same time, in the United States, the standards development community is not run by the government. It's not funded by the government. It's funded by the private sector. And one way that we fund that is through the sales of our standards. NEMA gets a significant amount of revenue from our standard sales, and it helps to pay for that work. That is not true in a lot of the countries that we've been talking about today, where the government supports it. And so you need to find a balance between legitimate access to standards when they're being used in regulations and still protecting that revenue stream from standards developing organizations. And I won't go into the legislation, but there is legislation in Congress right now looking at this issue and trying to protect that structure that we have and that funding stream for U.S. standards developers.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Sure. I'll jump in a slightly different way. So we are funders of the standardization system in numerous ways. We are purchaser of standards. We pay membership dues. We sponsor all kinds of activities. And then I pay incredibly expensive volunteers who then jump in and write the standards and produce the next generation of standards that'll come out. And so we're sort of soup to nuts across the perspective. I will point out that so I was very involved. I was Microsoft's head of our open source software strategy in 2001, back when we were seen as really being quite negative on that topic and there was all kinds of concerns. And what we were told effectively at the time was Windows should be free, right? Linux is free. Windows should be free. At the heart of that conversation is a reality that the software industry believes that the copyright of its software was the basis for its business. We had to then think about what does it mean. Let's assume for a second that software would go to zero. What do you do if your business is based upon that? And I'm not saying that the standardization system is the same. The standards bodies are the same. But what I'm saying is that you guys in the standards world right now are faced with that same moment where you have to ask, where is your value? How are you going to drive that? What is the business model? Because as a standards participant and consumer, I need professional standards organizations to exist. I need good secretariats. I need high quality organizations that are going to advocate for entities to come together to do the work. But I will also challenge that there are 1,000 standards bodies and they have very different business models. There's not one way to do it. There are hundreds of different methodologies that are in there. And the change to a services-based world will come to standardization. The change for how you generate a business around standardization is coming to the conversation. And so I worry when the conversation turns into we need to protect a model in a specific context for all eternity, I then say, okay, is that really going to be the best outcome? Because it might be that there is a bit of Darwinianism that needs to play out. And that's a harsh thing to say, but I will point out that the CEO of my company has often said, and says it to us in group meetings all the time, just because we've been successful in the past does not mean we have any right to exist tomorrow. Zero. If we don't innovate, if we don't change, if we don't alter what we're doing, we will go away. Now, everybody's faced with that. And so this copyright topic is a tough one, and there are seriously complicated issues. I don't mean to denigrate anybody who's involved in it, but I do think we're at a moment where many people had businesses that were told buggy whip, industry went away, was literally a third of the economy was dedicated to horses, and then we went to cars. We have moments in time where things make massive change, and copyright has been at the heart of a number of issues now for the last 20 years, and I think that change is very active in this space too. So,
thank you for your question. I saw another hand in the back.
Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Caroli. I'm Senior Fellow here at the One AI Center. Thank you to all the speakers. I will start with just a couple of questions to Mr. Hughes. You said something very interesting about fast approval processes for standards. I'm currently looking at AI, international AI standardization processes, and I do see the need for fast updates of standards. But how do you think the fast approval processes you just described can be replicated internationally, because ITU-T has an accelerated approval process, and I'm not sure how it ensures that consensus and maturity, and also maybe to prevent undue influence from certain actors. So I would love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, it has to be balanced, as Laurie mentioned, with the credibility of the work, right? And so there is a limit to how much you can accelerate the standards. The way that we've done it is, one, it's a little bit easier because we're doing it inside of NEMA and it's just manufacturers. And so we are not driving those through our ANSI accredited process where there are more diverse stakeholders. And so that helps with the speed when you have fewer stakeholders. Another way that we do it is these standards are meant to be the areas of common agreement. And if there are disagreements in the scope of the standard, what we do is we will table those. And we will publish a provisional standard that is 90% of the way there. But it includes a really important 90% of the technical guidance that we need to get out into the market. And we can get that out quickly while we work on building consensus for that final 10%. And that has been the innovation in our process, because formerly we would get to 100% before publishing something. And we would have 90% of that already worked out behind the scenes, just sitting in draft form. So, you know, how do you apply this when there are more diverse stakeholders around the room, even in different countries and international standards? I can tell you, you're not going to get there in 5 months like NEMA has been able to do. There are certainly non-standards approaches. If there's a need to move very, very quickly, there are other options out there. But I do like that model of, you know, the provisional guidance, get it published while you're getting to 100% consensus.
Anybody else want to comment on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the slow step should be the negotiation. There should be the people part where you're arguing over the technical content. The slow part should not be the process. It should not be the paperwork. It should not be the drafting. It should not be the when can we schedule the meeting next? You know, is it going to be 2 months from now? But sometimes that's the slow step. So the slow step should be the part where the people are arguing, discussing, negotiating content. And so if we can get rid of all that other stuff, I think we can speed up the process significantly. And a lot of people are looking at that. How can you make sure you bring together the people, the right place at the right time, and get that part, get the work done?
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to do a lightning round. One last comment about that the audience should know about the standard strategy. A takeaway from this conversation. We'll go this way, and Laurie, you'll be last.
I think a lot has already been said about the strategy, and it's I'll repeat myself somewhat. We have to seize this moment. We can't sit back and say, you know, there are these big barriers in our way, and it's hard to do, and it's slow, and so let's just give up, or let's let status quo continue. That's not an option. And I'm really impressed with how succinctly ANSI has been able to put a strategy together. If you haven't read it, it's only 6 pages, and I'd encourage you all to look at it and digest it, because there's a lot of great content in there, and it applies universally to our standards development organizations and industry. So thank you again to ANSI, and please join us next week at the ANSI Innovation Summit if you want to go into a lot more detail on the standard summit, standard strategy, and thank you.
Yeah, what ANSI has put together is one of the most robust standard strategies to date. out of the organization. So we thank you for your leadership. I think it's really made a difference. And it's time to breathe life into it. And let's bring government along as a partner in doing that.
Jason?
I'll be very brief and simply say we need to collectively embrace the diversity of the standard system that's in front of us. And I think that the strategy has done a wonderful job of being inclusive of that and then being really thoughtful about some of the large blocks that need to be moved. And so couldn't endorse it more. I think it's a great next step. And I'd like to thank ANSI for having us here today, as well as CSIS for being kind hosts.
And Laurie, you get the last word.
You know, I just came back from Africa where I was attending an international meeting, and several delegations walked up to me and said, your strategy is amazing, right? Now, isn't that funny? That these are delegations from South Africa, South America, from Africa, from Europe, from Asia, saying, we've already read it. Now, I want to hear that when I'm on the streets in Washington, D.C. and in the United States. We've read your strategy because it is really important. It lays the groundwork for who we are and what we need to say to the world and who we want to be moving forward. And I hope we can accomplish that together.
So let's give our panel a round of applause. And also to the audience. It's been a very attentive audience. I didn't see people looking at their phones very often, and only a couple of people left. So, and for the people online, I think you had a good experience too. So thanks to all of you for coming.
Thank you.